Thanks, Chris. So, as you're probably aware, CMON has put out their animation collection on Kickstarter. What I'm going to do here is let's do a little comparison of Scooby Doo. And who doesn't love Scooby Doo? Let's compare Betrayal at Mystery Mansion versus Scooby Doo the board game. In a which one should you play? This versus that. If you're not familiar with the Scooby Doo game that just came out in 2020, it is Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. It is a recreation of Betrayal at House on the Hill, themed as the Scooby Doo gang finding, trapping, unmasking monsters. For years prior to this, this game was thought of as the perfect IP port for Scooby Doo to begin with. And when Scooby Doo the board game got announced by CMON last year, there was sort of a question because it was right around the time that this game was getting released. Just before then, I think. And the question on my mind, as someone who grew up with Scooby Doo and someone who loves Scooby Doo and whose kids love Scooby Doo, is what do I do? It is the perfect way to integrate board gaming and my kids and activity time with them. So long story short, I ended up with a copy of Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. So let's take a look. The artwork on the box is fantastic. Let's talk the actual game by game comparison. Like I said, this is more of a known quantity at this point. So that is a positive for Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. You know what you're getting. There are enough reviews, there are enough playthroughs, there are enough games out there in the wild that you know more of what you're getting. When it comes to Kickstarter in general, when it comes to CMON in general, often these cards are held very close to the vest. You can get Betrayal at Mystery Mansion right now. If you're lucky, you're going to have this maybe by the end of the year. And to be honest, with the way Kickstarters have run, especially with the way this Kickstarter in particular is going, with the pre-painted miniatures, I do not believe you will have this in under a year. So the question is also now versus later. Which is more important to you? That ties it into the next comparison. Let's talk about the actual components of games. Now, I don't always do this, but these are special exceptions. As you can see on the Scooby Doo the board game from CMON, I mean, it's CMON. You're gonna get minis. Now, the interesting thing that they have done here is they are offering fully painted figures. Not only from the base game, but also from the daily unlocks that are down below. There also may be an expansion or two added, as there have been for the other two games on this collection so far. So there may be additional components that you can get. And say what you will about the gameplay often with CMON, whichever side of the argument you fall on that, but their miniatures are top notch. And if the paint job looks as good as it does in these renders, that's pretty impressive. On the contrary, let's talk the components from the Avalon Hill game. I have a copy, so I can speak firsthand to the components here. I am not impressed by these components. The majority of them are fine. However, two in particular, the dice are very generic, but more importantly, the player cards and the markers that they use on the player cards are just not good. They are flimsy, and the markers have absolutely no give to them, and they are very hard to get onto the player boards without damaging the player boards themselves, and to even move them to mark the stats alongside of them. Every time I touch it, I am concerned that I'm going to break something. Same thing with the standees. They're not the worst standees I've seen, but they are also not the best standees I've seen, because as with a lot of standees, when you're taking them in and out, you always worry about fraying the bottom, and that's not something I like dealing with on a daily basis, especially with kids, because you know kids are not going to be easy on those. So when you're talking components, miniatures are a much more durable, kid-friendly alternative. This leads me into the next point, though. When you're looking at Betrayal at Mystery Mansion, and all you see here on this picture, right now, brand spanking new, you can buy it for, I think, $35 on Amazon. That's not a bad price. Miniature Market has it for $28 with shipping. Several people on the Board Game Geek market have it for $25. And like I said, you can get it now. Alternatively, CMON, you're talking $80 freaking dollars. That was the biggest surprise of this campaign, is the fact that this is essentially almost 3 times the price that you could buy it for at Miniature Market right now. Now, obviously, part of that is inflated because they are miniatures, and part of that is inflated because they are pre-painted. The question, though, is that worth 3 times the value? Even if you say shipping is a wash on both of them. This has 8 pre-painted miniatures plus the mystery machine. You're going to get 8 more from the daily unlocks. So you're talking 16 miniatures. Is 16 miniatures worth essentially almost $50? That is probably the biggest or second biggest question in all of this. Is the value there for you? Because otherwise, I imagine that this is going to be much like Marvel United in their Kickstarter campaign that they did last year. The base retail pledge, the non-miniature painted version of this game, I imagine will probably be close to the release date here in November 2021. So you may be able to get it in 8 to 10 months at a retail level, unpainted, with just these 8 figures. Definitely not the daily unlocks. I believe all of those have Kickstarter exclusive next to them. So that is the other alternative route to go, is to get this game cheaper at retail, probably sooner than you get it on Kickstarter, but you're going to be missing out. The other aspect of value, let's be frank, is nowadays the turnaround, if I do not like it value, will it keep its value for resale, is on a lot of people's minds. And Betrayal at Mystery Mansion was selling for about $40 at retail when it was on pre-order. And so now you can see that it's down to $28. It was not $28 to begin with. I know that for a fact. So from a value standpoint, this one has not held up nearly as well. Now, finally, let's talk gameplay. Now, this is probably the biggest marker of things. Because as they say, an average, mediocre, crappy game, whatever you want to call it, is always going to be that. And sometimes, is it worth paying more for a product that is better? Betrayal at Mystery Mansion is relatively straightforward. It is heavily luck-based. It is, as people have said, a stripped-down version of Betrayal at House on the Hill, albeit much lighter in mood, tone, and atmosphere. It also has a very poorly written rulebook. The comments section and the forums are full of people asking for clarifications on rules for a retail game that you would think should have been proofed 1,000 times over. And that is very discouraging. It's very irritating, and it's very frustrating. The gameplay is relatively simplistic. Go to a room, randomly spawn it, grab a card that matches, maybe do something with the card. Finally, one of the good guys turns into the bad guy, and then they go head to head. That is another element that sometimes people don't like. My kids right now do not like that. Dad is always the monster, no matter what, because the kids don't want to do that. It turns a cooperative game into actually a competitive game. And a lot of the time when I'm playing with my kids, I have enough competitive games that they will often not favor because they don't want to have a loser. They don't want to lose. This game does have 25 scenarios, different scenarios, and so that is a definitive plus. And on the other side of things, it's simple enough that I can teach my almost 7-year-old this game and he can have a relatively decent grasp of what to do. Now, on the flip side, this game, there is not much known on this game. What you see is what you get. There is one gameplay video that Quackalope did a gameplay video of. I've watched it. I have read the rulebook. This game, although the appearance very much gives off family-friendly, very light, kids-ish, heavy retail availability, the rulebook, when laid out with the mechanics, reads a little bit differently. This is a much more nuanced game than the appearances it gives. And that is because of the AI and the interaction system between the bad guy, the monster, the villain, and the Scooby Gang. Because there is a time limit, because there is a deck you are drawing from, because there is strategy on the initiative and which card you are playing now versus saving later, and the fact that you cannot coordinate with your teammates to tell them exactly what you are doing on every single turn. It becomes very nuanced and very strategic, and at the same time, you can't necessarily quarterback because you are not allowed to tell people what card you're playing. So it solves a little bit, in a sense, often the quarterbacking problem that people have with many of these cooperative games. You may be able to see here that this is the board. And just an example of this is these arrows that are on all sections of the board that are helping determine what route or what path the monster or villain is taking. And you do not know until his card gets flipped over at the same time your cards get flipped over. And so he might be on the green path, he might be on the red path, he might be on the blue path. And you have to try and predict and plan accordingly. So there is a lot of elements there, but at the same time, they're relatively simply put together so that it's not overwhelming either. So where does that leave us here at the end? Definitively, price point, ease of accessibility, and just availability easily fall on the side of Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. However, components, art, actual gameplay all fall on the CMON Scooby Doo the board game side of things. So what am I going to say? What am I going to do? As I've thought about this, I have become very strongly thinking towards moving on from my Betrayal at Mystery Mansion as much as I enjoy it in theory. I'm also not sure I enjoy getting it out and setting it up and dealing with some of the finicky nature of it. And so to be able to move on and use part of that to recoup the cost of the Scooby Doo board game from CMON is heavily where I personally am finding myself going. Because I think the painted miniatures take it over the top, and I think the exclusives that you're going to be getting, assuming they add the value that I potentially think they're going to add in terms of the difference in the villains and how they each work, makes this a much more invested game in terms of... But ultimately, in the long run, I think it is going to have a much longer shelf life, much more overall enjoyment of figuring out a fun puzzle, as opposed to the randomness that is Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. And I think it'll stay with us longer in terms of what the kids will want to play in the future. So for me, that is the way I'm leaning. What do you think? Scooby Dooby Doo, where are you in terms of which one is right for you? As always, thanks for listening to my rambling. I'll see you around. Stay classy.